One of the main themes of my channel is the role gold will play during an era of currency failure, which is appropriate since one of the themes of history is that currencies tend to fail. I've tried to put as much rigor into the subject as possible. However, much of the work has been academic in nature, primarily due to lack of reliable information available during a real currency failure event. Fortunately for us, but unfortunately for the residents of Venezuela, the failure of the bolivar provides us with an opportunity to really study what gold does during a currency failure event. We can learn much from the recent events in Venezuela and use the information to help protect ourselves from suffering their fate. Thanks to the technology available via the internet, we can learn what we need to know. Shown here is information collected from the Expatistan website. This is a website that caters to expats, and it collects real-time cost of living information for various countries around the world. It allows residents of a particular area to enter prices of items in real time. Available information includes food, housing, clothing, transportation, personal care, and entertainment. I'm going to focus on food in this video because it is the most basic concern of all of the poor souls living in Venezuela right now. On the left, we can see a snapshot of the current price in bolivar of various food items. For example, we can see that 1 kilogram of apples currently costs 632,396 bolivar in the city of Caracas. If you like, you can pause this video and study the other prices listed on this chart, or even better, you can go to the Expatistan website itself, but I'm going to move on for the sake of time. While the website only shows current prices of items, we can use the Internet Wayback Machine to view a web capture of information in the past. The Wayback Machine had available a capture from January 3rd of 2017. This is about a year and a half ago. The web capture of the food prices back then in Caracas is shown on the right. Notice how much lower the prices are. For example, a kilogram of apples only cost 96 bolivar back then. A jump from 96 bolivar to 632,396 is an alarming increase of roughly 6,600 times. To put this into perspective, in early 2017, 632,000 bolivar would pay for nearly 2 years' worth of rent in a 900 square foot furnished apartment in an expensive area. Now, the same amount of currency will only buy a 2-pound bag of apples. Think long and hard about that for a minute. So let's take a look at how much each of these food items has risen in price in terms of bolivar over the past year and a half. The cost of a basic lunch has increased 1,233 times. Fast food has increased 1,840 times. Chicken has increased 2,940 times. Milk has increased 7,602 times. Eggs have increased an amazing 15,234 times. Tomatoes have increased 2,484 times. Cheese has increased 1,695 times. Apples, as I noted, have increased 6,587 times. Potatoes have increased 2,644 times. Beer has increased 4,203 times. Wine has increased 8,801 times. Coca-Cola has increased 10,592 times. And bread has increased 3,588 times. Now, it's hard to use this data like this to establish an estimate of how much the cost of living has increased, but when I average these items together, I get a number close to a factor of 5,000. One might argue that this number is not very scientifically established, and I will concede that point. Though I compared the rent for that 900 square foot furnished apartment that I referenced earlier, and it is about 4,000 times higher now than it was in January of 2017. So let's take the 5,000-fold increase estimate as being ballpark correct. A 5,000-fold increase in the cost of living is for all intents and purposes a complete collapse of the currency. Anyone who had all of their wealth in bolivar is now completely wiped out. It's horrible to think about such a fate. Many of us, especially those living in the United States and other Western nations, treat this kind of currency collapse as a complete impossibility. I'm sure those living in Germany back in the early 1900s had the same view of the safety of their currency as we do today. So how can a person preserve their wealth in light of potential currency failure? Well, I suppose one way is to warehouse tons and tons of apples, cheese, and potatoes. But storage space is expensive, and these items will rot before long. Another possibility is to own land. But what if a desperate government decides to seize land, or tax it heavily? Land cannot be moved or hidden. What about gold? I keep hearing that you can't eat gold. True. But in a country where the currency has collapsed, will gold still buy food? On the black market, I'm sure it can. Let's see if it can still buy as much food in Venezuela now as it could back in early 2017. Here is a chart showing the price of an ounce of gold in Bolivar from early 2017 until now. On January 3, 2017, the price of an ounce of gold was 11,515 Bolivar. Now it is 291,988,633 Bolivar. Notice that the price of gold on the chart was barely visible before the failure of the currency commenced. Rest assured, it had a price, and that price was quite volatile for the full year of 2017, much like the price is pretty volatile in US dollars. It is the scale of the chart that makes it hard to see. Let's focus in on an earlier time frame and see what gold's price looked like. Look at this chart for a moment. Let's imagine we have a Venezuelan who had bought some gold. Let's further imagine that the Venezuelan had a typical Western mindset where units of currency was the ultimate goal. Maybe he or she bought in early November 2016 at 13,000 Bolivar, and then watched in despair as the price of gold crashed to 11,300 Bolivar in the span of only a couple months. This would have been a 13% loss. Now, I've heard lots of people in the precious metals community fretting and acting in despair that in the past couple of months, gold has fallen from $1,300 per ounce to $1,180 per ounce. That's a drop of 9% in 2 months, pretty similar to what our unfortunate Venezuelan gold holder experienced in late 2016. But maybe our Venezuelan gold buyer was an expert market timer and managed to buy in late December 2016 at the low of 11,300 Bolivar per ounce. Over the next 11 months, he or she saw the amount of Bolivar an ounce of gold could buy increase by 25%. Maybe that was the gain that our Venezuelan gold holder was hoping for, and he or she sold out into Bolivar to spend their gain on something. Maybe some apples. I'm here to tell you folks that using gold for making a currency profit on the short-term fluctuations is really not what gold is for. To demonstrate, let's say that our Venezuelan gold holder thought that 14,000 Bolivar was too pricey for an ounce of gold, and then sold all of his or her gold for Bolivar, waiting for a pullback that would bring the price back down to under 12,000 Bolivar per ounce. Well, what happened after that sell decision? Well, as we can see, in February of 2018, gold changed nearly instantaneously to 33 million Bolivar and never looked back. It kept climbing and climbing and climbing until it reached the point where it is now, just shy of 300 million Bolivar. This, my friends, is what a currency collapse looks like. It is sudden, and I can't say it comes without warning. However, I can say for certain that most people will be caught completely unprotected and by surprise. This is the currency reset event. Remember what I said earlier about the cost of living in Venezuela going up by a factor of 5,000? Well, the price of gold increased by a factor of 25,357. In other words, gold increased in purchasing power by a factor of more than 5. This is worth some discussion. The cost of living went up by a factor of 5,000. That's inflationary, right? Well, maybe. It depends upon your frame of reference. Anyone living in Venezuela who counted their wealth in bolivar would consider this to be hyperinflation. But what if our Venezuelan held 100% of his or her wealth in gold? Well, then the amount of real goods that Venezuelan could afford would have increased by a factor greater than 5. The destruction of the currency was hyperinflationary for the holders of currency, but it was hyperdeflationary for the holders of gold. Put that in your pipe and smoke it, Harry Dent. Now, am I suggesting that a person keep all of their wealth in gold? No. I certainly will not chastise somebody for doing so, provided they are comfortable with gut-churning volatility and purchasing power. What I am suggesting is that for every unit of currency a person stores as savings, that person should set aside 20% of it in gold, and never sell that gold unless needed to fund living expenses, even if it appreciates in price. That last bit about not selling gold if it appreciates in currency is important. It might be a hard concept to grasp. We can use this lesson from Venezuela to see why. Suppose our Venezuelan gold holder was lucky enough to hold onto his or her gold through all the volatility of 2017, and then saw the price of his or her gold increase to 33 million bolivar in February of 2018. This was an amazing increase in currency terms. Our gold holder would have been quite rich. Well, only on paper, that is. He or she could have sold out for 2,865 times more bolivar than what was used to purchase the gold. But then what would have happened next? Holding the currency from that point forward would have resulted in impoverishment. You see, a gain from gold in currency terms might be real, but it also might be a sign of currency failure. Selling gold after a tremendous on-paper gain might be a big mistake. I'd encourage you to think long and hard about this. One thought that occurred to me when I used the Venezuela data to calculate a 20% minimum gold holding to ensure currency wealth was that it was very similar to a number that I concluded was smart back in late 2015. In late 2015, I put together a video entitled Positioning Based Upon the Odds. For anyone interested, the video is still up. But here is the main chart. This chart was established with the help of historical data for gold and bonds in US dollar terms going back about 50 years. What I said back then was that a person should consider two potential outcomes when deciding how much gold to hold. One outcome was the status quo case, where future outcomes can be predicted based upon past data. The other was the reset case, where past data was virtually worthless as a predictor. I stipulated that holding 20% gold and the remainder in bonds was really the safest position for a person who was unsure about what the future had in store. Much more gold meant that the person would be subject to great variability in purchasing power if the status quo remained in force. But much less gold meant that a person would be overexposed to a potential currency crisis. Now, what I find interesting is that the 20% number I established was independent of the hyperinflation in Venezuela, mainly because the Venezuelan hyperinflation hadn't even started yet. The 20% number was based upon US dollar-denominated investments only. And if you look back at the inflationary episode of the 1970s, you will see that 20% gold was enough to keep a person whole in terms of purchasing power back then. Is it a coincidence that 20% seems to be the right number? Maybe. But that's for you to decide for yourself.